Hello and happy Friday. Thank you for stopping by my channel. If you are new here, then welcome. My name is Maddie and I'm a science fiction and fantasy author. And if you are not new here, then thank you so much for returning. It means the world to me. I am super excited for today's video since I thought I would line edit chapter 2 of TCF on camera for you guys just to go over my line editing process. Since I've had some separation from TCF, I had been really working on the story Bible and fleshing out the political parties and their different aims and goals and how they are each in opposition with the other one, and how each of the front runners for these parties has their own personal agenda that they're hoping to accomplish through the political landscape, and how that will further the overarching conflict for TCF by the end of the third book. The past few days I had been working on line editing chapter 1 and getting it rewritten into Word. The reason I'm choosing to film this line edit rather than some of the editing I'm doing for Blood Donor is because this is a much higher level edit, and this has been through multiple rounds of revision already, and Blood Donor we're keeping it light, keeping it breezy, keeping it fun. So yeah, I really just want to tackle chapter 2 today and get into it and getting it to a point where I'm really proud of it and ready to eventually, when the whole thing is done, send this out to beta readers again. So that's our agenda for today, and if you'd like to keep watching, then stay tuned. Line editing can be broad and touch upon a range of things. However, since I don't really need any more overarching story notes, I don't think at this point. I pretty much have my plot nailed down. I am using line editing to focus on grammar and syntax, flow, sentence structure, and also making sure that I am using a variety of sentence lengths and structures. I'm looking for any repetition of lines or words or even ideas that I don't need to keep hitting in the chapter since we have already heard it once, or it's being shown through actions or dialogue, things like that. I'm also making sure I'm staying in the POV of Zolia and that I'm not head hopping or dipping into someone else's consciousness, since this is third person limited and there are definitely moments where I do slip on that POV, so we are going to make sure we are keeping it focused. I'm making sure that all my other characters and their motivations are clarified, making sure nothing is muddy unless that is intentional, and making sure again that these political tensions and setups are clear and make sense for the story and the world, and that they are believable and grounded in not necessarily reality, but that they are grounded enough to have that suspension of disbelief. I'm going to make sure my tone is consistent and make sure that it sounds cohesive and that it's all coming from the same book. I also want to find places where I can either simplify my prose or step it up, just depending on the context of the scene, and making sure that it's clear but also nice to read and enjoyable to read. Basically, this is just going to be incredibly nitpicky since this is a higher level edit. This chapter 2, one of my subscribers was a beta reader, so this is not the same chapter 2 that they read since it has already been rewritten. But then since I kind of hit that wall, we're just going back through and really pumping things up. So yeah, I'm gonna pull up Scrivener and we will just get started to editing. Okay, so I have Scrivener pulled up and I'm already in revision mode. Here I have chapter 2, it's all one scene and it's about 2,000 words. So I guess I will just like read it aloud, and then I have it screen recording here, so it's just kind of like cohesive, I guess. 7 years later, year 2018, I did adjust the year to something that we recognize as like, yeah, that makes sense since the technology is comparable to where we are at now with our world, even though this is an entirely different world. Tick, tick, tick. The second hand in an old grandfather should be clock. And an old grandfather clock moved forward with a distracting loudness that Zolia clung to. The steady tick pushed out the oncoming dread of never seeing her therapist, Krista, again. For her part, Krista appeared unperturbed by the repetitive noise and spoke, "I'm so proud of you. You've grown so much since our first session." To me, this could read either way of being a little on the nose, but I kind of don't think so, since I think if you are a therapist, clear communication of your feelings and stuff is pretty important, since you are working with people who just kind of need that clarity of conversation, and then it kind of bridges the gap, I think, with the time, since there is quite a large time jump, and the first chapter is very different in content, so I like this. And Zolia's response of, "You're sure I don't need at least 4 more sessions," I think kind of bridges. It really shows that she does have that oncoming dread, even though I did state it up here. But I kind of, yeah, I think that is good. "We've been over this," Krista said. It was true. The ending date for Zolia's court-mandated therapy had been set a year ago during her last rehabilitation check. "And you don't want me to recommend more sessions. Your daily suppressant checks drop down to just once a month as long as you don't use your powers." Again, I know it is like kind of coming out and saying it, but since I am building context for this, I think that it's good, and I don't think that it's like too on the nose. I think that it's more helping the reader kind of build up what is happening after the end of the first chapter and building a new framework for how the world is working in the current day. There is that. In italics, I love that for thoughts. Still, I'm just not ready for things to change again. Zolia shifted in her seat. Even after talking to Krista for the past 7 years, there were still barriers that were hard for Zolia to break down. It was due to trauma, Krista had told her once. Because this has already like been edited from my paper version, so I don't think there's going to be too much. Again, I'm okay with where things are at here, because it is providing context. Krista smiled at her and pushed graying hair behind her ears. I really don't feel like I need the "at her" because that's kind of, where is my strike through? Krista smiled and pushed graying hair behind her ears. While she glanced at her notepad, Zolia noticed how deep the lines and wrinkles were around her soft brown eyes. Her therapist went and got old while Zolia looked more or less the same. Zolia would live 3 of Krista's lifetimes before succumbing to old age. "Not all change is bad, though. You had your interview 3 days ago?" Zolia nodded. "And how did it go?" I think this is okay. This one may need another pronoun clarification. I think it went really well, Zolia said. Oh, that should be period. But even if I don't get it, I enjoy what I do. Her heart squeezed at the words. Zolia desperately wanted that promotion, but happy people didn't get sad if things didn't go their way. And that was what these past 7 years had been about, being happy. This is a huge change from the Zolia of chapter 2 in earlier drafts. She was already dissatisfied. And while I think there is an element of dissatisfaction here, I think it's definitely toned down. And there's kind of like this self-righteousness that used to be in her character with being dissatisfied, and this one is, she definitely sees it as more of a fault to be dissatisfied. It was so important for me for it always to be, we're seeing this person who is supposed to be at the end of their story, in the end of their arc, and they were supposed to reach that enlightenment, and it's the fall. That's always been the driving force of the story. So I really like this change of having her like really want to have that final missing piece of being happy, and it always just kind of escaping her before she falls. So that's where I'm kind of going with this, and I think that, you know, I like where we're at. Krista quirked up an eyebrow. I do have these 2 paragraphs here, but I think that's okay. What, you still aren't harboring hope of being a senator someday? Those were Silas's. I am changing to that. Those were Silas's plans for me, Zolia shrugged. These are the plans I'm making for myself. That had become a mantra for her once she was able to grapple with the fact that Silas betrayed her and Far, that he had only ever acted out of his own self-interests, rather than for the freedom of variance. At the mention of Silas's, again we are changing. At the mention of Silas's name, that easy smile dropped from Krista's face. Speaking of Silas, there's something I think we should talk about together before parting ways. Again, Zolia's traitorous heart clenched at the mention of something that wasn't good for her. Well, she's the one that mentioned Silas, so I don't think we really need this one. Conversations about Silas Trust years ago. This information isn't public yet, but I wanted you to be prepared when it breaks, Krista said. But Silas was killed in prison a few days ago. I don't know if but is the right conjunction. I don't know, I kind of just, like, she's just coming out and saying it. Everything in the room stilled. The clock ceased ticking and Zolia stopped breathing. Zolia found herself nodding, though she didn't know why. There was a difference between understanding his betrayal and expecting him to go through a trial. For his crimes, and a different thing entirely to hear he was dead. I mean, there was a difference and a different thing entirely to hear he was dead. There was a difference between understanding his betrayal and expecting him to go through a trial for his crimes than to hear he was dead, maybe. It was easier to hate him when he was alive, easier to remember every cruel and callous thing he had done to her, but dead. All the good memories surfaced, his paternal role in her childhood. Even now, he was the closest thing she could consider a father. Closing her eyes, Zolia focused solely on her breathing. In, out, repeat. I'm living my own life now, not Silas's. I do love adverbs. I do love adverbs, and it's so hard to get rid of them, and I'm not going to get rid of this one. I know it's a heavy topic to bring up on our last date together, but I'd rather you hear it from me rather than the news. So again, that's a repetition. I'd rather you hear it from me than the news. You're safe here, Krista assured. For Krista to offer her that olive branch of acceptance, that knowledge that despite of who Silas was, he was still important to Zolia. That's a sentence fragment because it's for Krista to offer that olive branch of acceptance. That was enough for her. Rubbing her eyes with unshed tears, Zolia shook her head. I'm fine. Should you choose to continue therapy, you can always get specialized grief counseling. It won't hurt forever. Krista smiled, sympathy softening the edges of her mouth. Krista just smiled, I think. Eyebrow. Sometimes I have to like practice the faces here so I like know what to say. I mean, I think we can just like have her say that. Sympathy softening the edges of her mouth, eased some of the sharp hurt. I kind of like that continued metaphor or just like imagery. Zolia said nothing, did nothing. Krista shifted in her seat. We still have some time together. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Thank you. So I'll just thank you. The words were out of Zolia's mouth before she knew what she was saying. For everything, I mean, I wouldn't have gotten this far without you. Again, I'm just really trying to show a Zolia that is so close to completing an arc. And that's kind of starting this new arc. Instead of like this, it's going to be like this. And this is kind of a facade, but it's something that she wishes was true. And I do feel like I am telling some of that, but I think I am blending it with enough showing that it's okay, because I don't want to rely solely on showing or solely on telling, because I think either one, just telling would be boring, and just showing, I don't think there would be enough context for this jump from chapter 1 to chapter 2. Give yourself some more credit, Krista said. Again, I like my commas. You put in the work to change your mind and create the life you wanted for yourself. It's my life, Zolia repeated to herself, I guess. She was powerless to stop the change, just like she was powerless to stop Silas. The change, I don't know about that one. But she was powerless to stop change. But she could control her emotions. Losing Krista wouldn't break her. She was still going to be happy for this new life that she had created for herself following the end of the rebellion. This is clunky. You know, I kind of feel like this is repetition. Like we know it's the end of the rebellion. So we're going to take that out and just leave a period. By the end of their session, Zolia managed to lock away any lingering sadness about Silas's about Silas's death and the fear of an unknown future without Krista. She thanked her again for leaving the simple office that had so integrally defined her first years in a post-rebellion world. And see, we have this like post-rebellion, so we don't need that up there, and I think it fits better down here. Making her way to the nearest subway stop, Zolia shouldered past the throngs of people who were always present in the downtown commercial district of Italia. It wasn't until a long and stuffy subway ride later that she emerged to a less crowded side of the city. The Bureau of Variant Integration and Wellness stood in the same block where the Variance Revolution, as it had come to be called, had occurred. I don't know. This may be clunky, but I don't really know how to shorten that. And so some of this will be more refined and edited when I'm rewriting, because I don't get people who could just like edit this and then make it look pretty again and then like just keep working. I have to rewrite things into different files. I'm jealous of those people that can keep things in like one document. It was far from the well-manicured lawns with rows of neatly trimmed hedges and austere ancient buildings that made up the rest of the government district. I mean, this really isn't part of it, so made up the government district. I need that. The Bureau was one out of 10 commercial buildings that had been rebuilt or restored in the past 7 years. The 3x10 city block radius that suffered the brunt of the war was still devastating and wholly deserted. I know that is a fragment, but stylistically I like it, so I'm keeping it. While there were days where the work felt meaningless and the view of their past burdened their present, Zolia loved her work at the Bureau. She was fortunate to even have a job in the government. After her initial assault on Peter and the refusal to side against Silas, there had been talks of charging her with collusion until Krista had stepped in. Thinking about Krista sent a pang through her chest. Krista had been her first stepping stone to what a life without violence might look like, and now she was ripped from her life like it was nothing. Today was shaping up to be a hard day, one of those days where the work was more taxing than inspiring. I don't think this is a bad line, but I don't like it. Because it's just like, feels juvenile. I don't know. Okay, let's give her an action, because this has been a lot of telling. So let's change this from today was shaping up to be a hard day to then let's give her a thought. Zolia scoffed at herself. So it's going to be one of those days. One of the days where the work was more taxing than inspiring. I like that a lot more. The glass doors, that were supposed to be locked, opened with the smallest of pushes from Zolia. No one who didn't work at the Bureau. No one who didn't work at the Bureau ever came to this part of town. How about... Right, because that's like a lot of negatives, so... Only employees of the Bureau ever came to this part of town. Only employees of the Bureau ever came to this part of town. Security was so lax that neither of the two security guards looked up from their computer screens when she stepped into the lobby. Bypassing the broken elevator, Zolia went up a flight of stairs to her floor of hastily constructed cubicles that filled out the length and width of it. Despite the war being over, variants needed help, and the integration of variants into human society carried more problems than Zolia had ever anticipated. Again, and I like that line because she was young when this happened, right? She was only 17. And I think when I think about the YA that I read about revolution, or it was dystopian, again, it seems like there's this idea that if you just take out the bad guys, then everything will be okay again. And that's really not how it works. So I like this line because it's more about the after of that. And that's kind of why she's being pushed to her limits again, because everything she worked for, it mattered, but it didn't matter in the same way of this like romanticized idea of revolution did in her mind. Rumors of a remodel stopped long ago. There was always too much work to be done for the bureau to close. I like that, but I don't think this fits here. I think that would fit more there. And then, right, because it's like there was always too much work to be done for the bureau to close. Despite the war being over, variants needed help. And then, what is this? That's a one sentence paragraph, but that's fine. I love changing up the lengths of paragraphs. Rowan, her first friend she ever made in the barracks, was already seated in her side. Would it be on her side? On her side of their adjoined cubicle. Staring intently at the screen, Rowan didn't so much as move a muscle when Zolia stood directly behind her, peering over her shoulder. I don't know. That might be a POV. Oops. That might be a POV slip. The Ullmans aren't receiving their stipend check still, Zolia asked, reading through the report illuminating Rowan's screen. Make sure to send that to Rishian Financial. Rowan turned around, revealing a thin pair of wire-framed glasses. It was a new habit for Rowan to try and mimic, or to try human things, like look ridiculous in glasses that had no prescriptions in the lenses. I know what I'm trying to say, but I don't think I hit the mark with that one. To try human things like look ridiculous. To try human things like wearing glasses. Only made her look ridiculous when all you knew. That's kind of clunky, so I will probably have to edit that when I go to putting it in Word, but I think that's a little bit better. It may come as a surprise, but I do know how to do my job, she responded dryly. This was another thing that I really changed up and worked on, was the dynamic between Zolia and her friends. I watched a TED Talk with Andrew Stanton, one of the like OG writers of Pixar, and it was a TED Talk that like changed my life. I love it so much, and that is my Roman Empire. That's what I think about all the time. But basically, at one point, Stanton was talking about when they were writing Toy Story, and originally Woody was a much less, or he was a lot more unlikable, and he was very cruel and very authoritarian, and it just wasn't making for like a compelling story, or for it to be very compelling for him to be one of the like main characters, right? And they were talking in the writer's room, and they mentioned that it was okay for Woody to be kind, generous, a good friend, on the condition that he was the leader of the toys. And as so long as that condition was met, he was this great guy. But when that condition was taken away, that's when his selfishness and his other less desirable traits would pop out. And that's where we really see his arc, when Buzz knocks him off his like pedestal, and he loses the respect of the other toys, and he's kind of forced to not be in that leadership position. And that's something that I really thought about when kind of restructuring the dynamic between Zolia and Rowan, is I think Zolia can be a good friend, but there's always been this expectation that she's the leader, she's in charge, and that has been from the time she was really young, pre-teen to teenage years, and those are very those are really important years where you're forming your own opinion about yourself and about the world. So kind of always having that expectation of being in charge, I think that is something that's subconscious for her. I made Zolia a lot more passive in this one and bitter, but in this one it was really important to me that Zolia is directing the conversation between her and Rowan, because that is the condition of their friendship, is that they have this dynamic where right now they might be more so seen as equals, but Zolia has the greater pool in the relationship, and right, like she is telling her what to do even though they have the same job, they're in the same position. And I think that there is some resentment on Rowan's side, and that's why it was important for me to kind of peek that out, but not have it like Rowan rolled her eyes. You know, like they're still friends, but there is some friction. And again, that's kind of wearing away at this supposedly fully enlightened character. Zolia shrugged and sat down at her desk. I just hope they respond to you this time. Me too, Rowan admitted. She pushed her glasses up to the bridge of her nose. It looked so natural on her, like something she had been doing her whole life. Zolia had always been secretly jealous of how naturally assimilation can grow a friend. And so I just like that, like, even though there is the condition where Zolia has more power, there is this insecurity and kind of power that she's giving to Rowan, even though Rowan doesn't know it. Are you ready for the gala? Zolia asked. As I'll ever be, Rowan said, turning away from her work for the time being. Are you actually going to show up with Marshall this time? Zolia pursed her lips. In her opinion, that wasn't a fair shot. After the rebellion, Marshall and Zolia had been reacquainted through Rowan. Like Rowan, Marshall was a paragon of seamless assimilation. He exemplified everything that Zolia had learned happiness was. He fit all the boxes of living a fulfilled, ordinary life. And Zolia had nearly ruined their relationship at the last bar-sponsored event when she insisted they arrive separately. I don't say explicitly that they're together, but I feel like it's implied. I'll put a comment. Again, this is another relationship that I really reworked as well. Originally, what am I trying to say? Originally, they were married already, but now they're just dating. And again, I think that Zolia's kind of surrounding herself with people that she wants to be like, even though she expects them to look up to her and defer to her for decisions. So I kind of think it's like an interesting and unhealthy dynamic that is set up, but I think it would be very, even with therapy, like what they went through is incredibly traumatizing and doesn't set up like the best social dynamics. So I think that this feels realistic. And it feels realistic to me, so. I had to be there early. It just didn't make sense for him to be there too, Zolia defended. Right, and you have to be there early this week as well, Rowan asked, sarcasm blatant. That is part of the requirements for speaking at these events. Tiring of the conversation, Zolia turned to her computer, clicking on the internal messaging that connected all the computers in the building. See again, like, the conversation is taking a turn that Zolia doesn't like, so she ends it. She tapped her finger against the right button on the mouse, waiting for any news from Grant Howard, the Bureau's director. There should be a comma there about the promotion for the junior director position. Directly underneath Howard, it would give Zolia more reach and influence to help the nation's variants. Does the nation own them? And with the nation's first election since the rebellion coming over the horizon, it was more important than ever to make sure variants were protected. Again, I think that's good. Finding no new correspondence from Howard, Zolia sighed and opened the rest of her work software. She managed to focus on work for all of 3 minutes when she spun her chair around her Rowan. Do you think Howard will announce the next junior director before the gala? Rowan froze her typing. I don't think there was a deadline for the announcement. Why? It would be nice to have good news to tell Peter, Zolia said. You act like you already got the promotion, Rowan said, and Peter would be proud of you for just showing up to the event. Again, that can be, let's see, how does Rowan's tone shift from each sentence? Because I think that is a good point to show some friction, since Zolia and Peter's relationship has definitely shifted as well since their initial confrontation in chapter 1. Zolia ignored the second part of Rowan's little speech. You don't think I'll get it? I didn't say that. I just don't think you should act like it's a sure thing before it's done, you know? Right. At her curt tone, Zolia effectively ended the conversation. Zolia had the most leadership experience out of everyone, barring Director Howard, and she really wanted to impress Peter, a man whose idealism was second to none. Even after her haphazard assault, he never gave up on her. It was he who had insisted she speak about her experience from being Silas's protege to living a well-adjusted life every year during Farr's annual dinner to celebrate another successful year of peace. That is clunky. If the news about Silas hit Zolia harder than anticipated, seeing Peter again would fill that parental-sized hole in her heart. Zolia focused on her computer, steeling herself for an uneventful day at work. Not reading this for a while and then reading it now, I'm just like, I'm kind of proud of myself, because I think that from these to here, there was a purpose for everything I've written, and there are like a few comments and there were some changes, but there was nothing like that really stuck out at me as bad or like unnecessary for the most part. I do think this is a bit of a clunky sentence, but I'm going to work on that while I rewrite. But yeah, at this point, I didn't necessarily introduce any of the new political parties. That definitely gets more into here, and we still only have a very few characters that we know about, but it did not feel too info-dumpy to me, and again, I think I did try to blend telling and showing a little bit, but yeah, I'm actually really proud of this chapter, and I did increase the word count a little bit, but not by much, so that's totally fine. Yeah, so I'm going to pull up Microsoft Word, and I'll start putting it into there, and then I'm just going to do that chapter by chapter. When I get to these chapters that I haven't written yet, which I kind of have, some of them have plots down, but when I get to these ones, I think I'm just going to still draft in here. I'll do that line edit, and then I'll put it into Word. This was definitely a boost of confidence, since I was feeling so not confident in my story when I kind of ended it or took a break So I think this is good. This space was good. I feel a lot more confident. I love this story and I'm really proud of where it's going. Yeah, so I'm just really excited to get this back into the hands of beta readers again and then do a final proofread and edit before publishing, which will be, I don't know, my original goal was to have it to beta readers by October and it's September 25th, so that's obviously not going to happen. I kind of want to get it to beta readers though, like in January of 2024. I think that's a good time. It's kind of after the holidays, and then get it published by summer is kind of the timeline I'm looking at right now. Thank you so much for being with me on this journey. Like I said, one of my subscribers was a beta reader and the feedback from them was just invaluable, and I'm so thankful. And really it's just like feels so good and gratifying. And I just want to thank everyone who has been watching my channel. I am so excited to get this book out into the world and just like be able to hold something bound and have like a pretty cover and all that stuff like in my hands. I'm just so excited for that moment. So I think that is a big difference between visual artists and if you do something like writing, is like I've been working on this story in some shape or another since 2018, so 5 years of my life. And that's crazy to think about, and it's crazy because it's like, it's hard because there's, at times it can be like, what do I have to show for it? I'm still editing, I'm still doing this, it's still not perfect. But doing this, I'm like, it feels like there is an end date and it's not just this forever work in progress anymore. Yeah, so there's just like a lot of emotions I think going into finishing a book. But yeah, I thank you so much. If you have anything in particular that you do for your line editing process, let me know down below. Otherwise, please like this video, share it, or subscribe to my channel, or just you watching is enough and I appreciate it. And I can't wait to see you guys in the next one.